Working out in Compton today. Got some exhaust gaskets to change, a leaf spring, a tail wheel. There's also somebody coming to pick up an engine that we have. It's a spare engine, and so we swapped it out for overhaul. Now this one needs to go out and get overhauled. These hangar doors are much more labor intensive than the ones at Surf Air. Here's the engine we need to send out. Air-cooled, horizontally opposed 4-cylinder, just a simple carbureted engine. That's what it's like working for a small family-run company. I've only been working here as a contractor a little bit over about 2 months, and I show up today and there's a little Christmas present for me. How awesome is that? That's from the owner. Oh, sick. Wireless headphones. Thank you, Richard. Before working on one of these engines, it's important to check that the fuel's turned off, throttle is closed, and that the mixture is at cutoff. You also want to check and make sure the magnetos are turned off, master power's off, and the circuit breaker for the battery is pulled. All those things will make sure the engine doesn't accidentally turn over and start firing while you're working on it. So I'm going to be replacing the exhaust gaskets. These components up here, you can tell they're leaking a little bit, and so we're going to go ahead and change those out. We also change out the hardware, and you want to replace those lock washers every time you remove them, since they'll get deformed and they'll lose their ability to lock. Those little fins are bent out just a little bit, and so after you've tightened this down once, those will get flattened, and that's what's keeping the nut from running back. You want to replace it every time you take that nut off. The nuts on the backside are really close tolerance, so I have a shaved 1/2-inch socket that I use to remove them. They're still super tight to get at though. I also need to remove this scat tubing. This is an exhaust shroud that's collecting warm air and it's directing it down. This is actually the air box, this is the carburetor. But because of the Venturi effect of the carburetor, you could have icing even if it's not below freezing. So you can have icing conditions in the carburetor as high as about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If there are icing conditions present, the pilot will go ahead and flip this switch right here. When they move that switch, it's going to select the carb heat on, so it's going to direct warm air from the exhaust shroud into the air box to prevent icing. The other lever they have that I'll have to disconnect is for the cabin heat, and that's this right here. Right now the cabin heat is turned on. This flapper valve is closed, and so it's going to direct warm air from this muffler shroud into the cabin. When I push the switch in, it'll turn the cabin heat off, and now it's just fresh air coming into the cabin. I'll start by disconnecting those two scat tubes from the muffler shroud. I believe I'm also going to have to loosen these oil return lines. That's these right here. That's returning oil from the valves back down to the crankcase. This is the valve cover, and there's actually oil inside there to keep the valves cool while they're operating. So these return lines bring it back down to the crankcase. So I'll have to loosen those to give me some room to remove the exhaust assembly. Anytime you're loosening a fitting like a B-nut that's attached to another threaded fitting, like this one is. So there's the B-nut I'm loosening, and there's another threaded fitting. It's best practice to use a backup wrench on the threaded fitting. That way as you loosen the B-nut, it doesn't back out the threaded fitting as well. So here I'm using my backup wrench to support the threaded fitting while I loosen the B-nut. The engine overhaul guy just showed up. I'm gonna go let him in and we'll get this engine picked up.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast.
It's not about personality matrixels and charts. It's all about the bumps in your heart.
That's a nice guy. Check it out, here's the sheriff's helicopter. Off to do some policing. Okay, now that the engine's taken care of, I'll get back to work on the exhaust. It. I'm gonna remove it the whole way. That way we can clean up the flanges a little bit. They're a little dirty and they'll just leak again if we don't clean them. So clean those up with Scotch-Brite. I've got those flanges all cleaned up. Now it's time to put it back together with new gaskets and new hardware. I know I've explained this before, but if anybody's new to these videos, this is my second. I work part-time here fixing these banner tow aircraft and then full-time over at Surf Air. This is kind of a fun job because it's really hands-off. It's just me here today. I pretty much make my own hours. I'll be starting to fly these, doing banner tow operations, hopefully in the next 6 months or so. I just finished my tailwheel endorsement, the extra training in these aircraft to learn how banner operations work, and then I'll be flying them also part-time. That's it, all tightened up, good as new. All right, the next thing on my list is to change out a tail wheel called tail draggers, this style of aircraft. If you notice, the PC-12 has a landing gear up front and then 2 underneath the wings. This one's got 2 underneath the wings, but instead of in the front, it's this little wheel here in the back. I'm gonna have to hoist the back of the aircraft, but before I do that, I'll have to move it because right now the tail of this plane's underneath the wing of this plane. While we've got the tail wheel removed, it's a good time to inspect this this axle and make sure it's not cracked or damaged in any way. And then we'll go ahead and throw a new tail wheel on there.
Jake, you're back! Shut your face! I came back for the music.
So while I'm working back here, I'm also going to change out the hardware on the inboard release. This is the banner inboard release. So the banner gets towed from this point, and this cable here allows the pilot to disconnect the banner from up front. If they were to pull on this cable, it's right below their seat. If they were to pull on it, this will open and the hook will release the banner. Now the reason I'm going to replace this hardware is because if you see this nut here on the bottom doesn't have any thread showing. Typically when you install hardware, you want at least about 2 or 3 threads showing of the bolt on the other side of the nut. If you see this one here, that's the outboard release, and that's got thread showing on the other side of the nut. So we're gonna find a longer bolt, and we'll also change out this nut. Since it is a self-locking nut, we want to replace it every time we remove it. The bolt I found is a little bit longer than what is needed, so we'll just shim it out with an extra washer and it should work out just fine. On this plane, I'm just installing a Tinnerman, which is this small metal nut plate. This inspection panel had gotten a little bit loose. This is a fabric aircraft, and eventually the screws will start to pull through the fabric, and so this Tinnerman clips onto the fabric and then the screw threads into that. So I'm going to put all these screws back in and see if it holds tight with the Tinnerman installed. This is a 172. This is the kind of plane I did most of my flight training in.